The sun beat down on the courthouse steps as Anthony Reed walked out of the large wooden doors. The cool air from inside gave way to the heat of the afternoon, and he took a deep breath. The case had gone well, he thought. As the deputy attorney general, he had spent the last 3 weeks building arguments for a police accountability hearing that had the whole city watching. Anthony loosened his tie slightly and nodded to a few reporters who stood at the bottom of the steps. They knew better than to approach him directly after court. He always held proper press conferences when the time was right. Today wasn't that day. The judge had only heard initial arguments and the real work was just beginning. Just need to get these files back to the office, he murmured to himself, checking his watch. The leather briefcase in his hand felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the weight of the case itself, not just the papers inside. As Anthony made his way down the marble steps, he felt a presence behind him. Years working in law enforcement and then the Attorney General's office had given him a sixth sense about being watched. He glanced back casually, as if looking for someone he knew. 2 police officers stood about 15 feet behind him. One, tall and lean with a face like stone, the other shorter with shoulders like a football player. Both wore the standard blue uniforms of the city police department. Neither smiled when Anthony's eyes met theirs. Strange, Anthony thought. Usually, officers in the courthouse were friendly with him. After all, he had worked alongside many of them for years before his promotion. These 2, though, he didn't recognize them, and they were staring at him with unusual intensity. Anthony continued walking, turning down the wide courthouse corridor that led to the parking garage. The sound of his dress shoes clicking against the marble floor echoed through the hallway. Then he heard it. 2 more pairs of footsteps matching his pace exactly, staying the same distance behind him. He stopped at the water fountain, bent down for a drink, and used the moment to glance back again. The officers had stopped too, one of them pretending to check his phone while the other stared directly at Anthony without trying to hide it. "Can I help you officers with something?" Anthony finally asked, turning to face them fully. The taller officer stepped forward. "Just doing our job, sir." His voice was flat, emotionless. "And what job is that?" Anthony asked, keeping his voice pleasant but firm. "Security detail," the shorter officer replied, though he wore no courthouse security badge. Anthony had been around law enforcement long enough to know when something wasn't right. These men weren't assigned to courthouse security. He knew all those officers by name, and they certainly weren't assigned to protect him. "I see," Anthony said, though he didn't. "Well, I'm heading to my car now. No need to follow me any further." "We'll decide when our job is done," the taller officer said, a slight edge entering his voice. Anthony felt a chill despite the warm day. He was the second highest-ranking law enforcement official in the state, yet these officers were speaking to him with barely concealed hostility. His mind raced through possible explanations. Was this related to the police accountability case he just presented? The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidence. He straightened his back and adjusted his grip on his briefcase. "Officers, I'm Deputy Attorney General Anthony Reed. If you have official business with me, I suggest you state it clearly. Otherwise, I'd appreciate if you'd stop following me." The officers exchanged glances. "We know exactly who you are," the shorter one said. His hand rested casually near his belt. A courthouse clerk walked by, glancing nervously at the scene. Anthony nodded to her reassuringly, though he felt anything but reassured himself. "Is there a problem here?" The clerk paused, papers clutched to her chest. "No problem at all," Anthony said smoothly. These officers were just leaving. But they didn't move. Instead, the taller one took another step forward. "We need to ask you some questions about your movements today." "My movements?" Anthony repeated, bewildered. "I've been in courtroom 3 all morning, presenting the state's case before Judge Winters. There are about 50 witnesses who can verify that, including the judge herself. We need you to come with us to answer some questions," the shorter officer said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. By now, several people had stopped to watch the interaction. An older gentleman with a camera phone had begun recording, discreetly. Anthony noticed this from the corner of his eye and felt both relief and concern. relief that whatever happened next would be documented, concern that something was about to happen that needed documenting. "I'm not going anywhere without knowing the reason," Anthony said firmly. "If you want to question me, you can make an appointment through my office, or you can tell me right now what this is about." The taller officer moved his hand to rest on his holster, not drawing his weapon, but making the implied threat clear. "There have been reports of someone matching your description involved in suspicious activity near the courthouse." Anthony almost laughed at the absurdity. "Someone matching my description? You mean a black man in a suit? In a courthouse? Where I work every day?" The officer's expression hardened. "Don't make this difficult." A small crowd had gathered now, watching the confrontation unfold. Anthony was keenly aware of the optics. The first black deputy attorney general in the state's history being harassed by police officers after presenting a police accountability case. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Officers, I'm going to reach into my pocket and take out my phone. I'm going to call the chief of police, who happens to be a personal friend. Then we'll get this straightened out." Anthony moved his hand slowly toward his jacket pocket. "Keep your hands where we can see them," the shorter officer barked, his hand now fully on his weapon. The crowd gasped. Someone murmured, "They're harassing the deputy AG." Another voice said, "Keep recording, don't stop." Anthony froze, hand slightly raised. 20 years in law and justice, and here he was, being treated like a suspect outside the very courthouse where he'd just been representing the state. The humiliation burned, but he kept his expression neutral. Showing anger would only escalate the situation. "Listen carefully," Anthony said, his voice steady and clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I am the Deputy Attorney General. I have identification in my breast pocket. I'm going to reach for it very slowly. Is that acceptable?" The officers glanced at each other, clearly not having anticipated the situation drawing so much attention. The taller one gave a curt nod. With deliberate movements, Anthony reached into his jacket and produced his official identification card with the state seal clearly visible. "Now, would you please explain why you're following me and making veiled threats?" The shorter officer finally seemed to realize they had overplayed their hand. He took a step back, but his partner wasn't ready to back down. "We received reports of someone who might be carrying confidential court documents out of the building improperly," the taller officer said, though this reason sounded newly invented. "All my documents are official and part of my case files," Anthony replied. "If you have concerns about court procedures, you should speak with the court clerk or the judge." Just then, a loud voice echoed down the corridor. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned to see Judge Eleanor Winters standing at the end of the hallway, her black robes billowing slightly as she walked briskly toward the scene. Her face showed a mixture of confusion and alarm. The officers straightened immediately, the way people instinctively do when someone with authority enters a room. Anthony felt a wave of relief wash over him. Judge Winters had just presided over his case. She had seen him in the courtroom less than 30 minutes ago. Whatever game these officers were playing, it was about to end. The crowd parted to let the judge through. Her normally calm judicial demeanor had given way to visible concern as she took in the scene. The officers with their hands near their weapons, Anthony standing with his ID extended, the crowd of onlookers with phones recording. "Deputy Attorney General Reed," she acknowledged, with a nod. Then she turned to the officers, her eyes narrowing. "Officers, explain yourselves immediately." The taller officer's confidence seemed to waver for the first time. "Your Honor, we were conducting a security check." "In my courthouse?" "Judge," Winters interrupted. "Without informing me or the court security team?" Her voice was sharp with authority. "I just left my courtroom where Mr. Reed was presenting a case. Are you suggesting there's something suspicious about the Deputy Attorney General doing his job?" The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the hallway could sense what this was really about. Two officers who had decided to intimidate the man challenging police misconduct in court. The officer's actions suddenly seemed small and transparent in the light of day, exposed by the judge's direct questioning. Anthony stood still, watching as the situation shifted. For the first time since the officers had begun following him, He allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had just happened, and what could have happened if the judge hadn't appeared. Judge Winters looked around at the gathered crowd, at the officers, and finally at Anthony. In her eyes, he could see a growing realization of the situation she had just walked into, and the panic of understanding just how badly it could have ended. Judge Winters turned back to the officers, her usually calm demeanor replaced with stern authority. "I want your names and badge numbers. Now." The shorter officer shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Officer Wilson, badge 4872, he said finally. "Officer Grimes, badge 3549, the taller one added, his voice noticeably less confident than before. The judge pulled a small notebook from her robe pocket and wrote down the information. Anthony watched her, grateful for her intervention, but also aware that this situation was far from over. The crowd around them had grown larger, with at least a dozen people holding up phones to record what was happening. "Your commanding officer will be hearing from me directly," Judge Winters said. "Now, unless you have a warrant or legitimate reason to detain the Deputy Attorney General that you'd like to share with all of us right now, I suggest you return to your regular duties." Officer Grimes straightened his back. "With all due respect, Your Honor, we don't answer to the courts while performing our duties." A murmur ran through the crowd. Anthony could hardly believe what he was hearing. The officer was technically correct. Police and courts were separate branches of the justice system, but the open defiance in a courthouse was shocking. "You may not answer directly to me," Judge Winters replied, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "But you do answer to the law. And right now I'm questioning whether your actions are within the bounds of that law." Anthony decided it was time to take control of the situation. He tucked his ID back into his pocket and stepped forward. "Officers, I understand you're doing what you believe is your job, but I think we've established that I am who I say I am, and I'm acting in my official capacity. So unless you have specific charges to bring against me, this stops now." Officer Wilson looked like he wanted to back down, but Officer Grimes wasn't finished. "We received reports about confidential documents being removed from the courthouse, improperly." "By whom?" Anthony asked directly. "That information is part of an ongoing investigation," Grimes replied. Anthony smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's convenient. Judge Winters just watched me pack up my briefcase in her courtroom 15 minutes ago. The only documents I have are the ones I'm legally authorized to possess as the prosecutor in her courtroom." A court security officer had finally noticed the commotion and approached the group. "Is there a problem here, Your Honor?" he asked. "Judge Winters?" "Yes, there is," she replied. "These officers are harassing the Deputy Attorney General without cause. Please call the Chief of Courthouse Security immediately." The security officer nodded and spoke quietly into his radio. Anthony could see Officer Wilson growing increasingly uncomfortable, but Officer Grimes remained stubbornly in place. "Let me be clear about something," Anthony said, looking directly at Grimes. "Today I presented opening arguments in a case examining patterns of discriminatory policing. Then I walk out of court and am immediately followed and harassed by two officers who can't provide a legitimate reason for their actions. Do you understand how this looks?" Several people in the crowd nodded in agreement. Someone said, "Tell them, Mr. Reed." Officer Grimes's face darkened. "Are you accusing us of racial profiling, sir?" "I'm stating facts," Anthony replied calmly. "You can draw your own conclusions about how this might be perceived." The tension in the air was thick, enough to cut with a knife. Anthony maintained eye contact with Officer Grimes, refusing to back down. He had spent his entire career fighting for justice within the system. He had worked with good police officers who risked their lives daily to protect people. But he had also seen how power could corrupt, how bias could infect even those sworn to uphold the law. "My briefcase contains evidence of systemic problems within certain police units," Anthony continued, his voice level, but carrying throughout the now silent corridor. "Evidence I just presented in court, and suddenly I'm being targeted. That timing strikes me as suspicious, to say the least." Officer Wilson finally spoke up. "Sir, we were just following orders." "Whose orders?" Judge Winters demanded. Wilson looked at his partner, then back at the judge. We were told to keep an eye on anyone removing documents from courtroom 3 today. By whom? The judge pressed. Lieutenant Drake, Wilson admitted reluctantly. Anthony and Judge Winters exchanged glances. Lieutenant Michael Drake was named. In the accountability case Anthony was prosecuting, he was accused of overlooking excessive force incidents in his precinct. So an officer named in my case against police misconduct sent you to follow me, Anthony said slowly, making sure everyone in the hallway could hear him clearly. And you didn't think that represented a conflict of interest? Officer Grimes's hand moved slightly toward his holster again, a gesture so subtle most wouldn't notice, but Anthony did. So did Judge Winters. Officer, move your hand away from your weapon immediately, she commanded. There is absolutely no threat here that requires that response. The courthouse security officer returned with the chief of security, a tall woman with short gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. What's happening here, Judge Winters? The judge quickly explained the situation. As she spoke, Anthony noticed Officer Grimes whispering something to his partner. He couldn't hear what was said, but Wilson's expression changed from uncertainty to hardened resolve. We have reason to believe there's more to this situation, Officer Grimes announced suddenly. We need to check the contents of that briefcase. Anthony held his ground. You need a warrant for that. Not if we have reasonable suspicion, Grimes countered. The chief of courthouse security stepped between them. This is my jurisdiction while we're inside this building, officers, and I see no reasonable suspicion that would justify searching the Deputy Attorney General's briefcase. You don't understand, Wilson said, his tone urgent. We received information that what? Anthony interrupted. That I'm doing my job? Prosecuting a case that some of your colleagues don't want prosecuted? More people had gathered now, including several attorneys Anthony recognized and a couple of journalists who happened to be covering other cases in the building. One of them had a professional camera and was filming the entire confrontation. This is becoming a circus, the security chief said firmly. Officers, you need to leave the premises now or I'll have you escorted out. Officer Grimes straightened to his full height. We're not leaving until we complete our assignment. Your assignment appears to be harassment, Judge Winters said, sharply, and possibly intimidation of a state prosecutor, which could constitute obstruction of justice. The word obstruction seemed to finally penetrate Officer Grimes's determination. Obstruction of justice was a serious charge, one that could end a police career. We were just following procedure, he said, his tone slightly less confrontational. Then, your procedure needs reviewing, the security chief replied. Now I'm not asking again, leave the courthouse. For a moment, Anthony thought Grimes might refuse. The officer's face was flushed with anger, his body tense. Then Wilson touched his arm lightly. Let's go, man, it's not worth it. Grimes hesitated, then took a step back. This isn't over, he said quietly to Anthony. I believe it is, Anthony replied. And I'll be discussing this incident with your commanding officer and the police commissioner. The officers finally turned and walked away. Though Grimes looked back once with an expression that made Anthony's skin crawl, it wasn't just anger. It was hatred. As they disappeared around the corner, Anthony let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The crowd around them began to disperse, though many people approached to offer support. That was outrageous, one attorney said, shaking Anthony's hand. I've never seen anything like it. I have, Anthony replied sadly. Too many times. Judge Winters placed a hand on his arm. Are you all right? I'm fine, he assured her, though the confrontation had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. Thank you for stepping in. I'm not sure how that would have ended if you hadn't appeared when you did. Neither am I, she said grimly. And that concerns me greatly. The security chief approached them. Deputy Attorney General, I want to personally apologize for what happened. Those officers should never have been allowed to confront you like that. It's not your fault, Anthony said, but I would appreciate if you could get me copies of the security camera footage. I have a feeling I'm going to need it. She nodded. Of course. I'll have it sent to your office today. As the hallway Slowly cleared, Judge Winters stayed by Anthony's side. "This case just got more complicated, didn't it?" she asked quietly. Anthony looked down at his briefcase, thinking about the evidence inside. Evidence of patterns of misconduct, of racist policing practices, of officers abusing their power. Evidence that some people clearly didn't want brought to light. "It was already complicated," he replied. "Now it's personal." The judge's expression was troubled. "Be careful, Anthony. The people you're going up against clearly don't play by the rules. That's exactly why they need to be held accountable," he said. "If officers feel empowered to harass the Deputy Attorney General in a courthouse, imagine what they do to ordinary citizens when no one's watching." As they walked toward the exit together, Anthony couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The case he was prosecuting had already faced numerous obstacles: witnesses backing out after being intimidated, evidence mysteriously disappearing, judges recusing themselves under pressure. But he had never expected such a blatant attempt to intimidate him personally. It was both troubling and revealing. They were scared of what he might uncover, which meant he was on the right track. Outside the courthouse, the bright sunlight felt at odds with the darkness of what had just transpired. Anthony squinted up at the clear blue sky, thinking about justice, how fragile it was, how easily corrupted, and how worth fighting for it remained. Judge Eleanor Winters had always prided herself on maintaining composure. 23 years on the bench had taught her to keep her emotions in check, to present a calm face no matter what happened in her courtroom. But now, walking beside Anthony Reed down the courthouse steps, she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Fear, not for herself, but for what she had just witnessed, for what it meant about the system she had dedicated her life to upholding. "I need to make some calls," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "This incident needs to be documented officially." Anthony nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I appreciate your help back there, Judge. Not everyone would have stepped in." "Anyone with respect for the law would have," she replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Plenty of people with power chose to look the other way when confronted with uncomfortable situations. They reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the plaza. A few reporters still lingered near the entrance, and several turned their heads when they spotted the judge walking with the Deputy Attorney General. It was an unusual sight. Judges typically maintained strict boundaries with the attorneys who appeared before them. "I believe those officers were hoping to provoke you," Judge Winters said carefully, "to create a scene that could be used against you." "I know," Anthony replied. "It's an old tactic. Push until the target reacts, then claim they were being aggressive or uncooperative." The judge stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "What's in that briefcase that has them so concerned?" Anthony glanced around before answering. "Evidence that goes beyond what was presented in court today. Patterns that implicate officers much higher in the chain of command than Lieutenant Drake." Judge Winters felt a chill despite the warm day. "How high?" "High enough to explain what just happened." Anthony checked his watch. "I need to get this to my office. I don't think it's safe to keep it with me any longer." The judge made a decision. "I'll drive you. My car is in the secure judicial parking area. Those officers won't be able to follow us from there." Anthony looked surprised. "Judge, with all due respect, that's highly unusual." "So is what just happened. In my courthouse," she countered. "This is no longer about maintaining proper judicial distance. This is about protecting the integrity of our justice system." After a moment's hesitation, Anthony nodded. "Thank you." They changed direction, heading toward the judicial parking area behind the courthouse. Judge Winters used her key card to access the secure lot, noting with relief that the door closed firmly behind them. The lot was nearly empty. Most judges were still in court at this hour. "My car's over there," she said, pointing to a modest gray sedan in the corner of the lot. As they walked, she became aware of someone else entering the parking area behind them. She turned quickly, half expecting to see Officers Grimes and Wilson. Instead, she saw Chief Justice Thomas Powell, the head of the state Supreme Court. He was walking briskly toward them, his face set in a deep frown. "Eleanor," he called. "A word, please." Judge Winters exchanged a glance with Anthony. Chief Justice Powell was her direct superior and rarely visited the trial courts. "Good afternoon, Chief Justice," she said as he approached. "This is Deputy Attorney General Anthony Reed." "I know who he is," Powell said curtly. "What I don't know is why you're escorting him through the judicial parking area." Before she could answer, the Chief Justice continued, his voice low but intense. "I just received a call from Police Commissioner Harris. He claims one of my judges is interfering with a police investigation and showing bias in a case currently before her court." Judge Winters felt her face flush with anger. "That's absurd. I intervened when 2 officers were harassing the Deputy Attorney General without cause or warrant. They claim they were following up on a security concern," Powell countered. "They were following orders from an officer named in Mr. Reed's case," Judge Winters replied firmly. "A clear conflict of interest and potential witness intimidation." The Chief Justice looked troubled. His eyes moved from Judge Winters to Anthony, and back again. "This is a complicated situation, Eleanor." "No, it's not," she said, surprising herself with her directness. "It's actually quite simple. Those officers were attempting to intimidate a state prosecutor because of a case he's handling. If we allow that to happen, what message does that send about our justice system?" Anthony had remained silent, but now he spoke. "Chief Justice Powell, I understand your concern about the appearance of bias, but what happened today wasn't about the case itself. It was about officers attempting to overstep their authority." Powell ran a hand through his silver hair. "The commissioner is demanding that Judge Winters recuse herself from your case." "On what grounds?" Judge Winters asked incredulously. "He claims today's incident demonstrates you cannot be impartial." Judge Winters laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. "So if I hadn't intervened, if I had allowed officers to harass the Deputy Attorney General in my courthouse, then I would be impartial? That's twisted logic." The Chief Justice sighed heavily. "Politics and justice make uncomfortable bedfellows, Eleanor. You know that." "I do," she agreed. "Which is why we must be even more vigilant about protecting the integrity of our courts." A security guard appeared at the entrance to the parking area, looking around uncertainly. When he spotted the Chief Justice, he hurried over. "Sir, there are 2 police officers at the security desk demanding access to the judicial parking area. They say they need to speak with Judge Winters immediately." Judge Winters felt her stomach tighten. "Grimes and Wilson," she guessed. The guard nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Chief Justice Powell's expression hardened. "Tell them that unless they have a warrant signed by a judge, they have no authority to enter this area." The guard nodded and hurried away. Powell turned back to Judge Winters and Anthony, his face grave. "I'm beginning to see your point," he admitted. "This is unusual behavior from law enforcement, to say the least." Anthony shifted his briefcase to his other hand. "Chief Justice, those officers want what's in this briefcase. Evidence that could implicate high-ranking officials in systematic abuses of power." Powell looked at the briefcase with new interest. "How high-ranking?" "The Commissioner's office," Anthony said quietly. The Chief Justice's eyebrows rose. "That would explain his call to me." Judge Winters felt a surge of determination. "Thomas, we need to protect this investigation. If what Mr. Reed is suggesting is true, this goes beyond one case. It's about the fundamental fairness of our entire system." Powell was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Judge Winters had known him for over 20 years. He was cautious, politically savvy, and fundamentally decent, but he was also pragmatic to a fault. "What do you propose?" he finally asked. "I need to get these documents to a secure location," Anthony said. "Copies have been made, but the originals include handwritten notes that can't be easily replaced." The Chief Justice nodded slowly. "Use my car. It has diplomatic plates. They're less likely to be stopped." He pulled a set of keys from his pocket. "My driver will take you wherever you need to go." Judge Winters couldn't hide her surprise. "Thomas, are you sure?" "No," he admitted with a wry smile. But I trust your judgment, Eleanor. Always have. The security guard returned, looking anxious. The officers are insisting, sir. They say it's a matter of public safety. Did they present a warrant? Powell asked. No, sir. Then my answer stands. They do not have authority to enter this area. The guard nodded and left again, but his worried expression suggested the officers weren't giving up easily. Chief Justice Powell turned back to Anthony. Mr. Reed, I suggest you move quickly. My car is the black Lincoln at the far end. The driver's name is Hector. Tell him I sent you. Anthony extended his hand. Thank you, Chief Justice. I won't forget this. Powell shook his hand firmly. Just make sure your case is airtight. If you're going after the commissioner's office, you'll need irrefutable evidence. I have it, Anthony assured him. That's why they're so desperate to stop me. As Anthony walked quickly toward the black Lincoln, Judge Winters turned to her superior. Thank you, Thomas. This was the right thing to do. I hope so, he replied, his voice heavy with concern. Because we've just placed ourselves squarely in the crosshairs of some very powerful people. A commotion at the entrance to the parking area drew their attention. The security guard was arguing loudly with Officers Grimes and Wilson, who were attempting to push past him. This is outrageous, Powell muttered. They have no jurisdiction here. Judge Winters watched as Anthony reached the Lincoln and spoke briefly with the driver, who nodded and unlocked the doors. Relief washed over her as Anthony slid into the backseat, his briefcase and its crucial evidence safely with him. The Lincoln's engine started with a quiet purr, and it began moving toward the exit at the far end of the lot, away from the confrontation at the main entrance. He'll make it out, Powell said confidently. That exit leads directly to the freeway on-ramp. Judge Winters nodded, but her relief was tempered by a new worry. If the police were willing to confront a deputy attorney general in a courthouse and then try to force their way into a restricted judicial area, what else might they do? The officers finally spotted the departing Lincoln. Officer Grimes pointed and shouted something to his partner. Then both ran back toward the main courthouse, presumably to their own vehicle. This isn't over, Judge Winters said quietly. No, the Chief Justice agreed. I suspect it's just beginning. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Eleanor, be careful. Reconsider handling this case. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because they'll come after me next, she finished for him. Powell nodded grimly. The commissioner has powerful friends. He won't take this lying down. Judge Winters straightened her back, feeling every one of her 62 years but also the strength of her convictions. If I step down, they win. They'll know that intimidation works, even against judges. Your safety is less important than the principle at stake, she interrupted, firmly. I took an oath, Thomas. We both did, to uphold justice without fear or favor. The Chief Justice looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You always were the conscience of the bench, he said with reluctant admiration. Just promise. Me, you'll take precautions. I will, she assured him, though she knew no precautions could fully protect her from what might come next. The fight had moved beyond the courtroom now into darker, more dangerous territory. As they watched the Lincoln disappear through the exit, Judge Winters thought about all the cases she had presided over in her long career. Some routine, some heartbreaking, some momentous. But none had made her feel as though the very foundation of justice was at stake. Until today. Anthony sat in the back of the Chief Justice's Lincoln as it smoothly merged onto the freeway. His heart was still pounding from the confrontation in the courthouse. Through the rear window, he watched for any sign of pursuit, but so far the road behind them remained clear. Where to, sir? Asked Hector, the driver, glancing at Anthony in the rearview mirror. Anthony considered his options carefully. His office would be the first place they'd look for him. His home address was easily accessible. He needed somewhere secure but unexpected. Do you know the Federal building downtown? Anthony asked. Hector nodded. Yes, sir. Take me there, please. The Federal building housed several federal agencies, including the FBI field office. If the local police were corrupt all the way up to the commissioner, Anthony needed to take this evidence beyond their reach. As the car moved through traffic, Anthony opened his briefcase and reviewed the documents inside. Spreadsheets tracking patterns of excessive force incidents, internal memos showing complaints buried or dismissed without proper investigation, and most damning of all, a series of text messages from Commissioner Harris himself, directing officers to target specific neighborhoods and ignore certain procedural safeguards. The texts had been provided by a whistleblower, a brave officer, who could no longer stomach what she was witnessing in her department. Anthony had promised to protect her identity. Now he wondered if he could even protect himself. His phone rang, startling him. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Hello?" he answered cautiously. "Mr. Reed, this is Officer Wilson." The voice on the other end sounded tense. "I need to speak with you." Anthony's grip tightened on the phone. "I have nothing to say to you, officer. Any communication should go through official channels." "Please, just listen," Wilson urged. "I'm not with Grimes anymore. I need to tell you something important." Against his better judgment, Anthony stayed on the line. "I'm listening. Grimes isn't just following orders from Lieutenant Drake. He's working directly for Commissioner Harris. They've got a special unit, officers who handle problems for the higher-ups." Anthony's mind raced. "Why are you telling me this?" There was a pause before Wilson answered. "Because what happened today was wrong, and because they're planning something worse." "What do you mean?" "They know you have evidence against the commissioner. They're not going to let you use it." Wilson's voice dropped lower. "Grimes said they're going to take care of the problem. Tonight, I think they're planning to break into your home." Anthony felt a chill run through him. "How do I know this isn't a trap? That you're not trying to lure me somewhere?" "You don't," Wilson admitted. "But I'm putting my career, maybe my life, on the line by calling you. Check my record if you want. 15 years on the force, clean record until I got assigned to Grimes' unit 3 months ago." Anthony made a quick decision. "Where are you now?" "At the precinct. I told Grimes I needed to file our report." "Can you get to the Federal building downtown?" "Yes," Wilson replied. "Give me 30 minutes." After ending the call, Anthony sat back and took a deep breath. Could he trust Wilson? It could be a trap, but something in the officer's voice had sounded genuine. Fear, yes, but also determination. Anthony's phone rang again. This time it was Judge Winters. "Are you safe?" she asked without preamble. "For now," he replied. "I'm heading to the Federal building to speak with the FBI. This needs to go beyond local jurisdiction." "Good thinking," the judge agreed. "The Chief Justice and I have been discussing the situation. We're calling an emergency meeting of the Judicial Council tonight. This goes beyond your case now. It's about the integrity of the entire system." Anthony felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Judge. Not everyone would stick their neck out like this." "It's not courage," she replied. "It's duty. Listen, Anthony, be careful. These people have a lot to lose if your evidence becomes public." After hanging up, Anthony noticed Hector watching him in the rearview mirror. "Problem, sir?" "Nothing I can't handle," Anthony assured him, though he was far from certain that was true. The Lincoln exited the freeway and made its way through downtown streets. The Federal building loomed ahead, its glass and steel facade reflecting the late afternoon sun. Anthony felt a small measure of relief at the sight of it. Then he spotted a police cruiser parked across the street and another at the corner. His relief evaporated. "Hector, drive past the building," he instructed quickly. "Don't slow down." The driver complied without question. As they passed, Anthony saw Officer Grimes standing near the entrance, speaking into a radio. Somehow, they had anticipated his move. "They're watching the building," Anthony said, more to himself than to Hector. "Where to now, sir?" the driver asked calmly. Anthony thought quickly. "Do you know the old courthouse on River Street?" "The historic one?" "Yes, sir. Take me there. It's closed for renovation, but I have access." The old courthouse had been the city's main judicial building until the new Justice Center opened 5 years ago. Now it was undergoing extensive renovation to become a law museum. As a senior state official, Anthony had been given a key during a tour of the restoration work last month. As Hector navigated toward their new destination, Anthony made another call, this time to his chief investigator, Paul Chen. "Paul, I need your help," he said when Chen answered. "Meet me at the old courthouse as soon as possible. Come in through the service entrance on the east side, and make sure you're not followed." "What's going on, boss?" Chen asked, concern evident in his voice. "I'll explain when you get there." "And Paul? Bring your camera and recording equipment." Anthony's next call was to Officer Wilson. "Change of plans. Meet me at the old courthouse on River Street. Enter through the east service door." 30 minutes. By the time they arrived at the old courthouse, the sun was beginning to set. The grand old building, with its classical columns and stone steps, was surrounded by construction fencing and scaffolding. A perfect place to hide, Anthony thought grimly. "Wait here," he told Hector as he got out of the car. "If I'm not back in an hour, call Chief Justice Powell." With his briefcase clutched tightly, Anthony made his way to the service entrance and used his key to unlock the heavy door. Inside, the building was dim and dusty, filled with the skeletal shapes of construction equipment and covered furniture. He made his way to the main courtroom on the second floor, the most intact part of the building already partially restored. It seemed fitting to make his stand in a courtroom, even an abandoned one. 20 minutes later, he heard footsteps approaching. Anthony tensed, then relaxed when he saw Paul Chen enter the courtroom, carrying a bag of equipment. "This better be good," Chen said, setting down his bag. "I was about to head home for my kid's birthday dinner." "It's better than good," Anthony replied. "It's the case of your career." He quickly explained the situation while Chen unpacked a camera, recorder, and laptop. The investigator whistled low when Anthony described the evidence against Commissioner Harris. "You're going to need protection," Chen said. "These people play for keeps." "First, we need to secure the evidence," Anthony replied. "That's where you come in." More footsteps echoed from the corridor. Both men turned as Officer Wilson entered the courtroom looking nervous and out of place in his uniform. "I wasn't followed," he said immediately. "At least I don't think I was." Anthony studied the officer's face, looking for signs of deception. Wilson met his gaze steadily. "Why are you doing this?" Anthony asked directly. "Why turn against your own?" Wilson's jaw tightened. "My father was a cop, a good one. He taught me the badge means something. It's not a license to do whatever you want." He paused. "What Grimes and the others are doing, it's not policing, it's thuggery with a uniform." Anthony nodded slowly. "I believe you. But I need more than your word. I need evidence that links Grimes directly to Commissioner Harris." "I can give you that," Wilson replied. "Grimes keeps recordings. Insurance, he calls it. In case the higher-ups ever try to hang him out to dry." Chen looked up from his laptop. "Where are these recordings?" "On his personal phone, and backed up to a cloud account." Anthony exchanged a glance with Chen. "And you have access?" Wilson reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone. "This is his backup phone. He left it in his desk when we went to the courthouse. I took it." For the first time since the confrontation began, Anthony felt a surge of hope. With Wilson's testimony and Grimes' recordings, combined with the evidence he already had, they could build a case even the commissioner couldn't escape. Chen took the phone and connected it to his laptop. "This might take a while to download. Some of these files are encrypted." As Chen worked, Anthony turned back to Wilson. "You realize what this means? Your career is over." The officer nodded grimly. "I know. But I can still look my kids in the eye." The sound of a door slamming echoed through the building. All three men froze. "Someone's here," Chen whispered. Anthony moved quietly to the courtroom doors and peered out into the hallway. Shadows moved at the far end and he could hear low voices. "They found us," he said, returning to the others. "We need to move." Chen pointed to his laptop screen. "I'm not done copying the files." "How much longer?" 5 minutes, maybe less." Anthony turned to Wilson. Is there another way out of this courtroom? The judge's chambers, Wilson replied. There should be a private exit. Anthony nodded. Get Chen and the equipment to the chambers. I'll create a distraction. That's crazy, Chen protested. You're the one they're after. Exactly, Anthony replied, which is why they'll follow me. Get that evidence out of here. It's more important than any one of us. Before they could argue further, the main doors to the courtroom burst open. Officer. Grimes stood there, flanked by two other officers Anthony didn't recognize. Their expressions hardened when they saw Wilson standing with Anthony. I should have known, Grimes spat. Always were soft, Wilson. It's over, Grimes, Anthony said, stepping forward. We have everything. The recordings, the text messages, all of it. Grimes smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Hand over the briefcase, Mr. Reed. Maybe you walk out of here. That's not going to happen, Anthony replied. From the corner of his eye, he could see Chen quietly packing up his equipment. Then we do this the hard way, Grimes said, moving his hand to his holster. Think about what you're doing, Anthony warned. Assaulting a state official is a serious crime. Accidents happen, Grimes replied with a shrug, especially in abandoned buildings. The tension in the room was palpable. Anthony knew he needed to buy more time for Chen to escape with the evidence. Commissioner Harris sent you, didn't he? Anthony asked, raising his voice slightly. Does he know you keep recordings of your conversations with him? That you've been building your own insurance policy? Grimes's expression flickered with uncertainty. What are you talking about? Officer Wilson told us everything, Anthony continued. About the special unit, about the commissioner's direct orders, and he gave us your phone. Grimes's head whipped toward Wilson, rage distorting his features. You're dead, Wilson. You understand me? Dead. The distraction worked. As Grimes lunged toward Wilson, Anthony signaled Chen to make his escape through the judge's chambers. Chen grabbed his equipment and slipped away while the officers were focused on the confrontation. NYPD, freeze! A new voice echoed through the courtroom. Everyone turned to see Judge Winters entering through the main doors, accompanied by several officers in NYPD uniforms and what appeared to be federal agents. Step away from them, Officer Grimes, one of the federal agents commanded, his badge held high. FBI, you're interfering with a federal investigation. The color drained from Grimes' face as he realized he was trapped. The officers with him looked uncertainly between him and the FBI agents, clearly calculating their options. Judge Winters stepped forward, her expression severe. Officer Grimes, you and your colleagues are being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. Turn in your badges and weapons. For a moment, Anthony thought Grimes might resist. The officer's hand hovered near his weapon, his face twisted with anger and fear. But then, slowly, he raised his hands. This isn't over, he muttered. Actually, Judge Winters replied, I think it is. 3 weeks later, Anthony stood at the podium in the Justice Department's press room, facing a sea of reporters and cameras. The room was packed, with journalists standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. News of the police corruption scandal had exploded across the city, dominating headlines for days. Today, I am announcing formal charges against 14 officers and officials within the police department, including former Commissioner Harris, Anthony said, his voice steady and clear. These charges include abuse of power, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. Camera flashes lit up the room as he continued. This investigation has uncovered a systematic effort to protect certain officers from accountability and to target specific communities for discriminatory enforcement. Anthony paused, looking directly into the cameras. Let me be clear. The vast majority of our police officers serve with honor and integrity. They put their lives on the line every day to keep our communities safe. This case is not about attacking law enforcement. It's about holding accountable those who betrayed their badges and the public trust. From the side of the room, he could see Judge Winters watching, her expression solemn but satisfied. Beside her stood Chief Justice Powell, who had taken a public stand in support of the investigation despite intense political pressure. "I want to specifically acknowledge the courage of Officer Robert Wilson," Anthony continued. "Without his testimony and evidence, much of this corruption might have remained hidden. He reminds us that true integrity sometimes requires standing up to your own colleagues when they've gone astray." Wilson sat in the back row looking uncomfortable in his civilian clothes. He had resigned from the force the day after the confrontation at the old courthouse, but his evidence had proven invaluable. The recordings from Grimes's phone had revealed a network of corruption reaching all the way to Commissioner Harris's office. As Anthony fielded questions from reporters, he noticed a familiar face entering at the back of the room. Paul Chen, his investigator, who had been working around the clock to process the mountain of evidence they'd uncovered. "Mr. Reed," called out a reporter from the front row, "there are rumors that you received death threats during this investigation. Can you comment on that?" Anthony hesitated. The threats had indeed come. Anonymous calls in the night, a brick through his home window, suspicious cars parked outside his apartment. He had been living under protection for the past 2 weeks. "This case has faced opposition," he acknowledged carefully. "But the importance of the work outweighs any personal concerns." Another reporter stood. "What about the allegations that Judge Winters should have recused herself after intervening in your confrontation with the officers?" Anthony glanced at Judge Winters, who gave him a slight nod. "Judge Winters did exactly what any officer of the court should do when witnessing an abuse of power," he replied. "She protected the integrity of our justice system. The police commission's calls for her recusal were nothing more than an attempt to derail this investigation." As the press conference continued, Anthony found himself reflecting on the events that had led to this moment. What had started as a routine accountability case had exposed a cancer within the police department, a group of officers who believed themselves above the law they were sworn to uphold. "Mr. Reed," asked a young reporter in the second row, "what changes do you hope will come from this case?" It was a good question, perhaps the most important one. Anthony took a moment before answering. "I hope this case leads to meaningful reform in how we hold law enforcement accountable," he said. "Not just in our city, but across the country. We need stronger oversight, more transparency, and a culture that encourages officers to report misconduct without fear of retaliation." He continued, his voice growing more passionate. "But beyond policy changes, I hope this case reminds us all that justice isn't just a concept or a system. It's a choice we make every day. A choice to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult or dangerous." After finishing the press conference, Anthony made his way through the crowd of reporters toward Judge Winters and Chief Justice Powell. "Well done," the judge said quietly. "Though I suspect the hardest part is still ahead." She was right. Bringing charges was one thing. Securing convictions against powerful, well-connected officials was another. Commissioner Harris had already hired one of the most prestigious defense firms in the city, and his allies were working overtime to discredit the investigation. "We have the evidence," Anthony replied, "and the truth is on our side." "Chief Justice," Powell shook his hand firmly. "You've started something important here, Reed. Don't let it end with these indictments." As they spoke, Anthony noticed Officer Grimes being led through a side door in handcuffs, escorted by 2 federal agents. The disgraced officer locked eyes with Anthony briefly, his expression a mixture of hatred and defeat. Paul Chen approached, their small group. "Boss, we just got word that Judge Reynolds will be presiding over the first trial." Anthony nodded, recognizing the name of a notoriously tough but fair judge. "Good. We want someone who can't be influenced." The group moved toward the exit, followed by security personnel. Outside, a small crowd had gathered on the courthouse steps. Some held signs supporting the police department, but many more carried messages calling for justice and reform. "Looks like you've struck a nerve," Judge Winters observed. "People want to believe in the system," Anthony replied. "They want to know that no one is above the law." As they descended the steps, a woman broke away from the crowd and approached them. Anthony's security detail moved to intercept her, but he waved them off when he recognized her face. It was Lisa Thompson, the whistleblower whose initial evidence had started the entire investigation. A 15-year veteran of the police force, she had risked everything to come forward with evidence of misconduct in her precinct. "Ms. Thompson," Anthony greeted her with respect. "I didn't know you'd be here today." "I needed to see it for myself," she replied. To know it was real. Her eyes moved to the Justice Department building behind them, where the press conference had just concluded. "Is it enough?" she asked quietly. "Will it actually change anything?" It was the question Anthony had been asking himself for weeks. The case had already cost him his sense of security, strained relationships with longtime colleagues, and brought scrutiny into every aspect of his professional life. Was it worth it? "It's a start," he answered honestly. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but without people like you having the courage to speak up, it doesn't happen at all." Thompson nodded, seeming to find some comfort in his words. "My father was a cop," she said. "So was my grandfather. They taught me that the badge was about service, not power. I couldn't stay silent when I saw what was happening." Judge Winters stepped forward. "Ms. Thompson, I hope you know how many lives you've likely changed for the better. Not just the people who were being mistreated, but the officers who can now work in a more just department." As they spoke, more reporters approached, hungry for additional comments. Anthony's security team grew anxious, forming a tighter circle around their group. "We should go," Chief Justice Powell said, eyeing the growing crowd. "This is turning into a second press conference." Anthony agreed, but before they left, he turned back to Thompson. "We're creating a task force to oversee the implementation of reforms. We need people with first-hand experience of the department's culture. Would you consider joining us?" Thompson looked surprised. "You're serious? After everything that's happened, you still want a cop at the table?" "Especially after everything that's happened," Anthony replied. "We need diverse perspectives to get this right." She considered for a moment, then nodded. "I'll think about it." As they made their way to the waiting cars, Judge Winters fell into step beside Anthony. "You know the commissioner's allies will come after you next," she said quietly. "They'll dig into your past, look for any mistake you've ever made." "I know," Anthony replied. "They already started. My ex-wife called yesterday. Someone had been asking her questions about our divorce." The judge shook her head in disgust. "This is why corruption persists. Good people decide the personal cost is too high. Then we need to change that calculation," Anthony said firmly. "Make sure those who speak up are protected and those who stay silent face consequences." They reached the cars. Before getting in, Judge Winters turned to him. "The police union is filing a formal complaint against me with the Judicial Conduct Board. They claim I showed bias by intervening that day in the courthouse." Anthony wasn't surprised, but the news still angered him. "You did the right thing." "I know," she replied with a small smile. "And I'd do it again. But right actions don't always lead to just outcomes, we both know that." As Anthony's car pulled away from the curb, he watched the crowd through the tinted windows. Supporters and critics standing side by side, their signs competing for attention. It was a visual representation of the division this case had created. In the city, his phone buzzed with a message from Chen. "Just got more evidence from Wilson. You need to see this." The fight was far from over. For every officer like Grimes or Commissioner Harris, there were others who operated in the shadows. The system that had allowed such corruption to flourish was still largely intact. But something had changed. The wall of silence had been breached. Officers like Wilson and Thompson had chosen truth over loyalty to corrupt colleagues. Judge Winters and Chief Justice Powell had put justice above political expedience, and everyday citizens were paying attention, demanding better from those sworn to protect them. Anthony leaned back in his seat, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The past 3 weeks had been a blur of 16-hour days, security concerns, and intense pressure. There had been moments when he'd questioned whether it was worth it, whether one case could really make a difference against such entrenched problems. But then he remembered the look on Grimes's face when he realized he wasn't above the law after all, the relief in Wilson's eyes when he finally spoke the truth. the hope on Thompson's face today at the press conference. Small victories, perhaps, in the larger battle for justice, but victories nonetheless. His car turned onto the highway, heading toward the next meeting, the next challenge. The road ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and resistance from those who benefited from the status quo. But for the first time in weeks, Anthony felt something like optimism. Not because he believed the system would change easily or quickly, but because he had seen firsthand the power of individuals willing to stand up for what was right, regardless of the cost. That, he realized, was how change always began.